Hey everybody, ABC 10 meteorologist Brenden Mincheff here. It is the weekend, time for another drought update. We're going to talk drought, of course. We're going to talk about our reservoirs, our snowpack, our water levels. All of those are changing, seems like by the day with all the rain and the snow that we've had. But also something we haven't touched on just yet. I've mentioned it a couple times, but haven't actually talked about it yet. La Niña has finally come to an end. We move into now INSO neutral conditions. That's where we are right now, with perhaps El Niño and maybe a strong El Niño in the near future. We'll get to all that though, but let's start where we always do, with our precipitation tracker. This is for downtown Sacramento. So for the month of March, over 3 inches of rain has fallen so far. The rain that is falling on Sunday, as of this recording, March 19th, has not been counted yet on these numbers. So again, still more to come, and we are expecting more midweek rain and snow as well. And those numbers obviously are not here yet. But so far this month, over 3 inches. The average to date is under 2 inches, so we are about 1.25 inches to the good so far for the month of March. Now, for the water year as a whole, October 1st to September 30th, 23.79 inches in downtown Sacramento. The average to date is under 16 inches. It's just about 15.5 right now. So our departure from normal for the water year as a whole, we are now over 8 inches to the good in downtown Sacramento. And as we compared that to previous water years, we're really quickly catching up to 2018-19. I do expect we'll actually end up passing that before the water year is over. 30-year moving average is almost 19 inches of rain in downtown Sacramento. So we missed that mark in the 21-22 water year, the year before that, and the year before that as well. So 3 years in a row of very dry conditions, below average on the water year. And we also missed it in 2017-18. The most rainy year we've had, again, since 2018-19, but also we are not close to those numbers for the 2016-17 water year. So still a ways to go there. Don't think we'll get to that 2016-17 water year, but still a very good year, even it's just beginning, right, for the state in terms of water so far. Los Angeles, over 20 inches of rain. Santa Barbara, almost 25 inches of rain there. Stockton, over 20 inches. Sacramento, over 20 inches. San Francisco, over 25 inches. South Lake Tahoe, a water equivalent of over 30 inches. Same in Redding. And then Eureka, almost 35 inches of rain up there. So all the blue numbers are numbers that are above average to the good. The only one on this map is Palm Springs, less than an inch behind where they normally are. But San Diego, look, 3.5 inches to the good. LA, almost 10 inches above where they normally are. Same story in Santa Barbara. But Bakersfield, over 3 inches above where they normally are. Fresno, almost 10. Stockton, over 10 inches to the good. San Francisco, over 10 inches to the good. And even Northern California, which has been lagging behind for much of this winter, is now pulling out a little bit of a lead there above average. So Eureka and Redding, both multiple inches to the good at this point. And South Lake Tahoe, over 16 inches above where they normally are. So water year is in full gear right now. It continues to dump, and we've got more in the forecast. How much longer are we still going to be talking about rain falling? Well, typically our water year drops off, or our rainy season drops off pretty quickly after the month of March. April's average rainfall in Sacramento is just 1.25 inches, whereas both December, January, even into February and March, we're looking at totals well above 2 inches on average. Of course, we've blown all those numbers out of the water this year, but on an average year, this is typically what we're looking at, and you can see how sharply it drops off starting in April. So again, can't say exactly how much longer, but I would expect to see an end soon-ish to the rainy pattern for much of Northern California. Taking a look at the drought monitor, we finally have seen that improvement in the Sacramento Valley. We've moved from that severe drought category into the moderate drought category for much of the valley. Now 27.93% of the state is in that moderate drought category. That's mostly the Sacramento Valley and then again down here in the desert area. But that abnormally dry category, which is not technically drought, it's either recovering or entering drought. For this map in particular, it is recovering drought. You can see parts of the Imperial Valley down here. We also see, though, down Southern California between LA and San Diego is now in that yellow category, although LA proper and to the north is now completely out of drought. That base map gray color, there is no drought, no abnormally dry conditions. We are good to go. Thumbs up, no problems there. And then also up here in the Sacramento Valley, we see that abnormally dry yellow color as well. So more than 50% of the state at this point. When you combine that 44% and that almost 19% in the abnormally dry categories, that's over 50% of the state not in any drought whatsoever. And I will tell you, drought is expected to continue to improve and, in fact, may entirely lift out of Northern California by the time we get done with the rainy pattern this spring. So this is the best the drought map has looked since February 25th, 2020. When you look at that drought score of 93, that's what it was February 25th, 2020. This week it is 100 even. And again, even though there's kind of more colors on this map, it's mostly that yellow abnormally dry color. Therefore, that number is less than what you see here, even though we do have a very good portion of the state of California not in any sort of drought or dry conditions at all as things stand right now. This is interesting. I wanted to show you guys this. So this is the California Drought Time Series. So this is looking at the state of California since we developed the drought monitor in the early 2000s. And this is how it's looked. So obviously, you can see where there's more colors, the drought is worse. This is the same categorical graph here. So we're looking at that yellow is that abnormally dry, the lighter orange, moderate drought, the orange is severe, that D3 extreme drought, that's that red color, and then the D4 exceptional drought, the darkest red. That's all up here, just like you see on the normal maps. This is now plotted for time. So this is the year 2000 right here, and then as we go through towards the end of the map, right here is where we are right now in the year 2023. So when we look at this, what we're seeing is how the drought has evolved over time, how we've gone into drought, how long we've been into drought, and how long it took us to come out of it. You can see the droughts were relatively short, although we did have several of them in those early 2000s. Then, once we really turned the decade over to the 2010s, the drought got a lot worse. In fact, you can see just how bad it was in like 2014, 15, 16, and 17, how long it took us to recover from that drought, and then how bad it got yet again just over the last 3 years. When we look down here, this is that drought severity and coverage index, that DSCI, that drought score that we were talking about. Remember, it's 100 right now. It's the best it's been since February 2020 when it was a 93. That's what this is plotting. So this is showing you the higher the number, and it goes into a scale of 500, the higher the number here, the worse the drought is. So when we look at this, we can pinpoint right here when the DSCI, this was August 5th, 2014, it was 440 out of 500. That is the worst the drought has been on this map, and it's basically been a very slow recovery since then. We did recover in just right between 2019 and 2020, but then we entered another drought again just over the last 3 years as we've been very, very dry. Thankfully, we are eliminating that. We are recovering. As you can see, this is now. So you can see how bad it was over the summer and the wintertime. But then as that rain came and we finally were able to fill up those reservoirs, replenish some of that groundwater, top off the lakes, and build that snowpack again, that drought has finally made a recovery. And speaking of lakes and reservoirs, here's how we're doing now. Shasta at 96% of average. That's 73% capacity right now. Oroville, 83% capacity, 123% of average. And Folsom, 112% of average with 64% capacity. Let's kind of break these numbers down a little bit more, and we'll show you Trinity first. This is the one that's been lagging behind, that still needs that help. And unfortunately, it is a very slow fill just because of how dry we've been and how big Trinity is as a lake. So right here is where that water level's at, and that is that average line. So it's now finally at 50% of average. So if we're looking for some good news, there it is. It's 50% of the way there, but it is still only 35% of capacity. Here is Shasta now. This lake is just doing much, much better. Here's where it is right now, and there's average. My finger barely moved. It's 96% of average. Again, I love to show this map because we can see over the winter time just how empty the lake was. And then we had all that rain in January and some more in February, and now these storms in March have really done a number for this lake in a very good way. Again, 73% full is Shasta, almost completely at average. Here's Oroville now, 123% of average. So here's where the lake is, and that's where that average is. So it is above average. It's at 83% capacity. And yes, they've been letting some water out because they've been getting so much water coming in to the lake that even though they've been letting some water out, it has still climbed in its capacity as we've gone through the last several weeks, which again, good news, right? We can still manage our floods. We can still manage to protect against all the rain and the snow melt, but we can also work to keep that water, and the managers at Oroville really have done a very good job of doing that. SNOWPACK now also has been doing very well. In fact, we talk a lot about the Southern Sierra, where it's 273% of the April 1st average. That essentially means there's basically 2.5 years worth of snow sitting in the Southern Sierra right now. About 2 years of snow sitting in the Central Sierra, as it's 226% of that April 1st average, And then the Northern Sierra, 177% of the April 1st average. And of course, we're coming up on April 1st. So we are going to get there to that all-important date when our snowpack is typically the highest, and we're going to be above average in every category. It is important to note, though, that Northern California, or the Northern Sierra, is quite a bit behind both the Central and especially Southern Sierra, and that'll come into play in a minute. I'm going to show you some maps there. But statewide, 222% of the average to date and 215% of that April 1st average. All right, so we've talked a lot about reservoirs and snowpack individually. What does it look like together? Well, here's a map from the California Nevada Climate Applications Program, CNAP. And this, I love to show these because you can see the reservoir storage in the blue and the line, which is where it is at right now. The blue is your average, and then as we look at snowpack, the orange is where the snowpack is right now, and this gray shading is the average for snowpack. So even though our reservoirs are relatively, you know, they're full, but we do still have some such as Trinity that's only 50% there, right? Only 50% of average, but that snowpack is so far above average that our water storage right now is primarily in snowpack, and it is blowing the reservoir storage out of the water right now, no pun intended. This is for the state as a whole in the Sierra reservoirs plus our snowpack. But when we break it down into sections, Northern California reservoirs are actually much further behind than the Southern California, the Southern Sierra reservoirs are. You see that here. So here's that line. Average is here. So it is below average, and the snowpack is above average, but it's not that much above average, right? It's like 170-something%. Whereas compared to the Southern Sierra, look at this. The reservoirs are right at average. In fact, now climbing just a little bit above it. But literally off the charts is the snowpack for the Southern Sierra, off the chart as of March 12th. And of course, we've got more, and we're going to get some more as well. So that just goes to show you kind of a quirk of just how the storms made it here into California over the last several months. They've really hit the Central Sierra, the Southern Sierra, and Northern Sierra, and reservoirs up there as well have kind of been left behind a little bit. Again, above average, but it just does not compare to where the Southern Sierra is literally right now off the charts in terms of snowpack storage. As we look ahead, 8 to 14 days, March 26th to April 1st will very likely be cooler than average when it comes to temperature, and very much likely wetter when it comes to precipitation as well between March 26th and April 1st. So that means, yes, we're tracking potentially another storm about 10 days from now. It's still too early to talk exact impacts from that, but yes, we're tracking another potential storm. Could bring more rain and snow even as we turn the calendar over to April. Stay tuned for that. All right, kind of some big news here that has been relatively swept under the rug with all the rain and the snow that we've had. But La Niña is dead. We are no longer in La Niña conditions. Basically, when it's to negative 0.5 to positive 0.5, we call that INSO neutral, the El Niño Southern Oscillation neutral. When it's below 0.5, negative 0.5, that's La Niña. When it's above it, it is El Niño. So over the last 3 years, we've been in La Niña conditions. We've been in that negative 0.5 or stronger, but now finally we're turning that page. We talked a few months ago, if you think back, if you saw some of those videos, we talked a few months ago about how maybe this is changing, right? La Niña looks like it's trending down. Will that continue throughout the wintertime, and it's continuing into the spring as well? We're now in neutral conditions, and as we look at the El Niño threshold here, this orange line, look at how all the model points really trend above that line, above that El Niño threshold. Some of them really going quite strong between 1.5 and 2.5. This is kind of an outlier, these three right at the top here, but you see the bulk of the models here as we approach this coming winter. So this is August, September, October, November. This is October, November, December. We always do this in 3-month intervals here, and you can see how we're trending above that El Niño threshold. So I know it's a long way out. We're still technically in this winter, but as we kind of think about the future a little bit with all the water that we have and all the snow that we have, El Niño is not a guarantee that we'll have a wetter than average year, but it does slightly weigh the die a little bit in terms of maybe making things a little bit wetter than average. And of course, over the last 3 years, kind of with the exception of this winter, La Niña has really been very dry for us. So let's kind of run through what the El Niño Southern Oscillation is, what INSO is. When it's in neutral conditions, which is where we are now, we've got the trade winds, and they blow out from east to west, and it pushes the currents from east to west. So we get this cooler pocket of water building off the coast of South America, and the warmer water is pushed out into the central Pacific. That's what INSO-neutral conditions are. When El Nino develops, the trade winds are weaker, and we start to see this warmer pocket of water get pushed back to the east, all the way to the coast of South America, such as Ecuador, Peru, and northern Chile as well. And when that happens, it changes our weather pattern a little bit. We have some weaker trade winds. It has some effects on even the Atlantic hurricane season. But in terms of what it does for precipitation here in California, typically in an El Nino winter, we see wetter than average conditions. Again, this is typical, but again, for Northern California, we're kind of in that line. So it's a little better than average, but a little better than 50-50, but it doesn't mean it's a guarantee that we'll see an above average season. But generally, when we're in El Nino conditions, the southern part of the United States, from Florida all the way to Southern California, is wetter than average, whereas the northern United States, warmer than average and drier than average across the Midwest. Now, we've been in La Niña conditions, right? So here's what La Niña looks like. Those trade winds are stronger. That warmer air pushed back out over the central Pacific, and we have a nice cold pocket of water all the way from South America up or almost all the way towards Baja. And what that does for our conditions is it typically, again, not a guarantee, as we've experienced this winter, right? We've been in La Nina conditions, but we had a very wet winter. Not a guarantee, but typically drier than average in Southern California and across much of the southern United States, while it's wetter than average across the Pacific Northwest and far northern California. That is typical, not a guarantee, as we saw this year. Can't stress that enough. So as we talk about El Nino and La Nina and what it means to be in neutral conditions, sometimes it means we're wetter or drier than average, but it's not a guarantee. Now, two kind of big water things happened over the last week. We had the Pajaro flooding out in Monterey County due to a levee break, and I actually spoke with somebody from River Partners about the importance of funding and the importance of maintaining levees even in dry years, right? Sometimes it's easy to overlook the flood potential that we have here in California, especially when we're in an extended stretch of dry weather like we were before this winter. So it's important to continue to maintain levees and our flood protections. But Metropolitan Water District of Southern California also lifted their extreme water restrictions, their emergency conservation order down in Southern California. That is a big deal as well, and I spoke to somebody about that. So let's talk about the improving conditions, but also the need to never forget that we need to always be ready for flooding.
So on average, the agencies had to reduce their use by about 35%, and some had to reduce their normal use by up to 70%. And with the storms that we've had this year so far, our water supplies for that part of the region have improved enough that we're able to relax that most restrictive part of the regulation. What we're asking consumers to do now is to continue to use water efficiently and to conserve where they can, and to contact their local agencies who actually control the water restrictions to see what those would be. From our perspective, we just want people to use water efficient.
But Brad Coffey with Metropolitan Water District of Southern California wants to stress that just because the most severe restrictions have been lifted, it's not a free pass to use water wastefully, especially since conditions along the Colorado River are still dire.
And the important thing is, by people continuing to use water efficiently, that lets us fill our storage more quickly and puts us in a better place if next year turns really dry. Because what we've seen is these extremely dry to extremely wet cycles are happening with something we call climate whiplash.
And that part is really crucial, climate whiplash. It really strains our water infrastructure and resources, both when it is wet and also when it is extremely dry.
No, this is a pretty hard time because we are in, monumental flood management situation.
That is perhaps the understatement of the season from Julie Rentner, the president of River Partners. She reached out to me wanting to talk about the situation in Pajaro and how that could have happened almost anywhere in the state that is protected by a levee.
State has many, many, many miles, thousands of miles of rural levees, right? Levees that, exist next to our biggest rivers. Salinas is our third longest river in the state. And those levees, serve to keep raging water inside a river channel, a constrained river channel. because they're so long and they're so infrequently used, the last time the Salinas River saw flow, or the Pajaro River, or the San Joaquin River, name any river in California, they're all at flood stage right now. But the last time we saw water as big as we're seeing right now was many, many years ago. So what happens is, in the time intervening, right, between the big flood events when our levee systems are tested, those levees, they exist in an ecosystem, right? There's rodents burrowing into them. There's roots, growing into them. There's, small amounts of erosion into the levee prism itself. And over time, those kinds of accumulations of natural activities can actually compromise the strength and the structural integrity of earthen levees. So on the Pajaro River, what we saw is, and we don't know the specific reason why that portion of the levee broke where it did. There's a lot of kind of things happening all at once when you have high water and lots of velocity and lots of pressure and lots of power. But it was a devastating break in the levee in a place where the amount of damages are so high and the potential damage is so high. So, the hard part for all of us is that there's thousands of miles of levee just like that one across California that either we need to make a significant investment in upgrading them so that they can actually accommodate the size of the storms that are coming as our climate continues to change, or we need to think differently where possible with some of those levees. I don't think you would be hard-pressed to find anybody in the state of California who would say we have enough money to maintain our levee systems, or that the local agencies that are responsible for the maintenance of those levee systems are adequately resourced. They're not. We all know that we have a big backlog of deferred maintenance of levee systems and, needed, necessary upgrades, because we're looking at a really different hydrology than the one that we were looking at when those levee systems were engineered in the first place. Yeah. So the real challenge is making sure that as we respond to the changing conditions, our changing understanding of hydrologic conditions in California, we take full advantage of all of those places where we can kill 2 or 3 birds with one stone, where we can actually provide improved flood safety, but also get water that can spread out and sink into the ground in designated areas, right? Recharge some of our freshwater storage that's beneath our feet. Some portions of the Central Valley, like the main part of the main stem of the San Joaquin River, they're going to remain underwater from this historic snowmelt for weeks, if not months to come. And so how much those river channels and those floodplains and that hydraulic pressure can actually push into adjacent aquifers and flow across the bottom of the valley to recharge is largely unknown. I mean, it was just last month that DWR released the first set of data using aerial electromagnetic imaging to look deep into the valley soils to see, sometimes in some cases up to 1,200 feet deep, where those aquifers and channels are that interconnect and that support all of those groundwater wells. So, I think it's safe to say that collectively, from DWR and the folks, in charge of Water of the West, all the way to folks like us on the ground who are landowners and NGOs working on projects, we're all learning together. This is a big opportunity to learn.
In times of wet, it's easy to forget just how dry things can get here. And in times of drought, it's easy to forget about California's history of flooding. It's also easy to forget about levee upkeep and flood protection and infrastructure funding.
Belt tightening is very hard, yes, and it's hard. It's hard when you're in an economy as large as Californians. It's hard, in your household, with your own household budget. Nobody thinks that it's easy to make the prioritized decisions we have to make about where to invest and how to take California into the future. What we do know is that California's freshwater system drives every element of our economy, and without adequate management and protection and investment in California's water system, we're not thinking about the future, right? We're thinking about being responsive instead of proactive, and that's not where we need to be. So, we feel very strongly that even in a moment of belt tightening, there are certain things you just can't cut.
In light of the state budget shortfall, cuts have to be made. The Department of Natural Resources is facing the brunt of those cuts. The governor's proposed fiscal year 2023-2024 budget eliminates $40 million in floodplain restoration in the San Joaquin Valley that was passed just last year by the state legislature. Another $60 million was diverted away from the budget in fiscal year 2021 to 22.
And the state kind of decides year after year to divert funds away from such a multi-benefit solution. We think of a couple things. We think, first off, it's much more expensive to pay later than to pay now, right? And so the damages that we're experiencing as a result of this storm event or these series of storm events and not being prepared, they're much, much greater than if we had just spent the money to invest on the front end. But another thing that's really important to drive home is that it could be seen, especially as we think about state investments and, political cycles, it can be seen that maybe flood system investments in the Central Valley don't have a big statewide impact. And what we're learning as we talk, outside of our circles, just at the Central Valley or San Joaquin Valley, is that more and more we're realizing that flood safety and safety of our water delivery system in the San Joaquin Valley is of importance to tens of millions of Californians, right? 27 million Californians rely upon fresh water that comes flowing out of the San Joaquin Valley through the big pump systems in Tracy. And if we have contamination of that system, if we have damage to that system in ways that can't deliver that fresh water, we're in a real mess. Much more expensive than if we could do activities that create resilience and strength in our water system on the front end. So, folks also like to think there's this sensational dynamic about fish recovery and water, right? That somehow we have to choose between one or the other. And we think about it as one and the same, that the health of our salmon fisheries, the health of our ecosystems and our wildlife populations drives regulatory expedition, right? It makes it faster to get through the process to develop and deliver water management projects that benefit the entire state. And so it's kind of in the interest of every Californian to make sure that we're not only reducing flood risk and improving the resiliency of our water supply system, but also improving the ecosystem function in the San Joaquin Valley, so we stop getting into these regulatory battles. So it's going to take prolonged action to not only take optimum advantage of what we're experiencing right now, but also put the pieces in place so that the next time this happens, we're ready to grab even more of that water and help it soak into the ground. And that's where these investments in the future are really important. Not being reactionary and responding to damages and emergencies, but thinking forward about how we can prevent those emergencies or turn them into great opportunities in the future.